The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way, the Swedish supergroup is back.
What secret has Benny Andersson been carrying for over 4 decades since ABBA's peak? The quiet musical genius behind some of the world's most beloved pop anthems has finally broken his silence, and his revelations are reshaping everything we thought we knew about the band that gave us Dancing Queen and Mamma Mia. While Agneta and Frida captured hearts as the faces of ABBA, and Bjorn penned the lyrics that moved millions, it was Benny, the man at the piano, who held the emotional weight of their spectacular rise and devastating personal unraveling. If you love diving into the lives and stories of Hollywood's biggest stars, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video from Urban Spill. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us who your favorite actor or actress is. We just might create a deep dive video about them next. Your next favorite video is just a click away. He was never the face on the poster, never the loudest in the room. But if you listened, really listened, you could feel him in every note. Benny Andersson was the quiet genius behind ABBA's heartbeat. Not just the chords or the melodies, but the emotion that gave them life. Long before the flashing lights, before the sequins and sold-out arenas, Benny sat at an old upright piano in a modest Stockholm apartment, letting his fingers find emotions he couldn't always name. He once said he didn't really talk about pain, he composed it. That was his language. Music was how he told his truth when words failed. His childhood was simple. A working-class family, a father who worked as a civil engineer, a grandfather who taught him to play the accordion at age 6. That accordion wasn't just an instrument, it was an opening. A small boy hunched over the keys, learning how sound could become feeling. And from there, everything changed. And he wasn't chasing fame. While others imagined stages, he imagined harmony. He wanted to understand why certain notes made you ache, why some chords felt like home. He studied Bach's mathematical genius and the storytelling in Swedish folk tunes. By the time he was 10, he could play almost anything by ear. At school concerts and family gatherings, he didn't steal the show. He built it. In 1964, barely 18, Benny joined the Hep Stars. They called them the Swedish Beatles. But Benny brought something else. He added soul to their sound, complexity to their arrangements. While the others posed for cameras, Benny stayed close to the soundboard, mixing tracks, layering feelings into frequencies. And quietly, he was learning how to shape music like architecture. When he met Bjorn Ulvaeus in 1966, something clicked. Not just as musicians, but as kindred spirits. They didn't talk much at first. They didn't need to. They played. And in those first jam sessions, they found a rhythm, a shared obsession with structure, tone, and emotional weight. Two men building something they couldn't quite define yet. The spotlight was never Benny's comfort zone. He let others shine. But behind every ABBA song that made the world dance or cry, there's a moment, maybe late at night, maybe alone in a studio, where Benny sat at a piano, searching not for perfection, but for truth. And that's what made him more than just a musician. That's what made him the soul of ABBA. There's a moment that never left him. A small room, faint winter light seeping through the window, and a boy, just 6 years old, his fingers trembling over the buttons of an accordion. It was a gift from his grandfather. Nothing expensive, nothing grand, but it would become the most important thing Benny Andersson ever held. He didn't know it then, but that first note, that soft, trembling note, was the beginning of everything. Benny grew up in Vasa, a modest district in Stockholm. His family wasn't rich, but there was something in the air, something warm, something musical. His grandfather was a self-taught musician, and though he never played to crowds, he passed down something even more powerful: love. Love for sound, Love for the silence between the notes. Love for the feeling music could create, even in a tiny kitchen on a cold Swedish morning. It wasn't fame that fascinated young Benny. It was wonder. Wonder at how a simple melody could shift the mood in a room. How chords could lift someone's spirit or make their eyes well up. While other kids played outside, Benny would sit beside the radio, listening not just to songs, but to the stories inside them. He taught himself piano by ear. No lessons, no theory books, just sound, repetition, and intuition. He'd listen to a piece once or twice, then play it back, nearly note for note. That gift wasn't about mimicry, it was connection. He didn't copy the music, he felt it. And somehow, his fingers always knew where to go. At 10, he was already playing at family events and school gatherings. But he didn't perform like the others. There was no flash, no showmanship, just focus. Just this quiet boy who made people stop talking and start feeling. Music was becoming more than a skill. It was a refuge, a private world where Benny didn't have to explain himself, where emotion had shape, where pain and beauty could exist in the same chord. And maybe that's why, even decades later, you can still hear that child in his songs. The curiosity, the gentleness, the ache. Every time you listen to an ABBA melody that feels strangely intimate, as if it knows something about your life, it's because Benny never lost the voice he found as a child. He just let it grow up with him. It all started with a handshake at a small cafe table in southern Sweden. Benny Andersson, with his deep-set eyes and quiet presence, met Björn Ulvaeus in 1966. Both were young, curious, and already immersed in music, but from very different worlds. Björn came from the folk pop group Hootenanny Singers, while Benny had just wrapped up his time with the Hepstars, Sweden's version of the Beatles. Their meeting wasn't grand, but what came after would echo across generations. They didn't talk about fame. They talked about music. How chords move, how lyrics feel, how harmonies can make you cry without understanding why. They sat for hours, two young men with guitars on their laps, bouncing melodies off one another. They were both searching for something, perhaps meaning, perhaps magic, and somehow they found it in each other. Their early songs were simple, almost innocent. But even then, something shimmered beneath the surface. Benny once said it was like discovering a hidden language only he and Björn spoke fluently. That connection would deepen with every collaboration. Over time, writing together became second nature. Björn sculpting lyrics with narrative precision. Benny building the emotional architecture through melody. But it wasn't just about them. Something bigger was coming. In the late 60s, as their songwriting grew stronger, Benny fell in love with a young singer named Annie Frid Lyngstad, and Björn would soon marry Agnetha Fältskog, a bright voice already adored across Sweden. Love, creativity, and timing converged, and in that fusion, ABBA was born. People often assume ABBA's success was instant. It wasn't. There were years of trial and error, failed songs, awkward performances, and moments of self-doubt. But Benny and Björn never stopped creating. They had found in each other something rare, a perfect musical mirror. That partnership, quiet, loyal, deeply intuitive, would become one of the most powerful songwriting duos in pop history. And it all began not with ambition, but with a shared love of music and a friendship that asked for no spotlight, only sound. To understand ABBA's magic, you have to understand Benny Andersson, not just as a composer, but as an obsessive architect of emotion. While the world saw him as the man behind the keyboard, his real genius happened behind closed doors, deep inside the studio, where time seemed to disappear and only the music mattered. Benny wasn't chasing hits. He was chasing feelings. Real, raw, untouchable feelings that linger long after the song ends. He believed that a song wasn't ready until it gave him goosebumps. And he didn't care how long it took to get there. Sometimes he'd re-record a single piano phrase over and over until it breathed exactly the way he wanted it to. If one harmony didn't ache just enough, he'd rewrite it. If the mix didn't shimmer quite right, he'd start again. This kind of perfectionism was exhausting, not just for him, but for everyone in the room. But they followed his lead because deep down they knew he wasn't doing it for the charts. He was doing it for something far more sacred, to make people feel something real. And it worked. Think about the winner takes it all. That trembling piano, the heartbreaking rise and fall of Agnetha's voice, the sheer vulnerability of it all. That's not an accident. Benny built that soundscape piece by piece, shaping every detail until the heartbreak was almost too much to bear. It's why even people who've never had a divorce or a dramatic breakup still cry when they hear it. His perfectionism gave ABBA something most pop acts never achieve: emotional permanence. These weren't just catchy tunes. They were sonic portraits of love, loss, hope, and human fragility. Songs like Chiquitita, Fernando, and Slipping Through My Fingers pull you into their world and don't let go. Even during their glittering disco era, when the outfits sparkled and the melody soared, there was always something aching underneath. That haunting minor chord, that layered harmony that sounded almost like a sigh. That's Benny. What makes his perfectionism even more powerful is how quiet it was. He never demanded the spotlight. He wasn't loud or boastful. He just sat at the piano day after day, night after night, chiseling away at the invisible until it became something unforgettable. And maybe that's the secret. While others chased fame, Benny chased truth, musical truth. And in doing so, he didn't just help create ABBA. He helped create memories, moments, feelings we didn't know we needed, until his music gave them to us. As ABBA's fame soared, the members' personal relationships unraveled, with divorces between both couples, leading to emotional strain and creative burnout. At the height of ABBA's global fame, the lights on stage were blinding, the applause deafening, but behind the glittering curtain, something fragile was quietly breaking. The four members, two couples once deeply in love, were now drifting apart under the weight of relentless touring, media pressure, and the painful realities of life in the spotlight. Agnetha and Bjorn's divorce in 1980 sent shockwaves through their fan base. But to Benny and Annie Frid, it was also a warning sign. The songs they wrote, once filled with joy and romantic idealism, began to reflect something darker, something more personal. Tracks like The Winner Takes It All and When All Is Said and Done weren't just heartbreak ballads. They were thinly veiled confessions. Benny himself admitted later that it became impossible to separate life from lyrics. When Benny and Frida divorced a year later, the toll on the group's chemistry became even more apparent. Though the music continued, the energy had shifted. The studio became a place not only of creation, but of emotional tension. The dynamic that had once fueled their brilliance now served as a reminder of what had been lost. Each recording session grew more difficult, more distant. Conversations turned into negotiations, and melodies became outlets for buried pain. Benny's perfectionism clashed with the fragile emotional states of his bandmates. He was composing masterpieces, yes, but they were drenched in melancholy. The harmonies were still flawless, but the smiles no longer were. By the early 1980s, burnout had set in. Their final album, The Visitors, was a haunting farewell, laced with loneliness and introspection. And although ABBA never officially announced a breakup at the time, the silence that followed spoke volumes. It was the end of an era. And yet, Benny knew music doesn't lie. The heartbreak, the loss, the brilliance, It was all there, woven into every note. It didn't end with a bang. There was no fiery breakup announcement, no dramatic press conference, no tearful farewell tour that would have given fans a sense of closure. Instead, ABBA's end was like a slow fade out, subtle, almost imperceptible, a silence that stretched for decades, wrapped in mystery and unanswered questions. By 1982, the members of ABBA were no longer just bandmates. They were four people carrying the weight of years filled with heartbreak, exhaustion, and creative burnout. The magic that once effortlessly flowed between them was dimming. The final single, Under Attack, quietly entered the world without much fanfare. And then, just like that, the music stopped. For fans around the globe, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from beneath them. How could a band so beloved simply vanish without explanation? They had given the world so much. Unforgettable melodies, soaring harmonies, and a soundtrack to so many lives. Yet the silence that followed was deafening. For years, ABBA remained a mystery. Interviews were few and carefully crafted, offering vague statements and no clear answers. The band members chose privacy over publicity, leaving fans to speculate endlessly. Was it the result of bitter personal conflicts, creative disagreements, or was something deeper at play, something they weren't ready to share? That silence became a vacuum filled with rumors, hopes, and nostalgia. ABBA transformed from a group of four musicians into a legend frozen in time, a symbol of the perfect pop group that simply stopped existing. Their music continued to echo in living rooms, on radio stations, and in hearts worldwide. But the story behind the silence remained locked away. Yet, as Benny Andersson would finally reveal decades later, the truth behind their quiet dissolution was not scandal or betrayal. It was exhaustion, emotional depletion. The silent collapse of four people who had given everything, who had maintained the dazzling illusion of joy on stage while their personal worlds quietly crumbled. It was the price of survival. They didn't walk away because they wanted to. They walked away because they had no choice. The music that once united them was no longer enough to hold them together. They needed to stop, to breathe, to heal, to find themselves again. In that fading away, there is a kind of grace, not the grand, heroic ending we often expect in stories of fame, but a humble, human one. ABBA's story reminds us that even legends are fragile, that behind the glitter and sequins, behind the bright lights and roaring crowds, are people struggling to keep themselves whole. Their silence was not the end of their music's power. Instead, it was a pause, a quiet space that allowed the songs to become timeless, allowing listeners to fill the gaps with their own memories and emotions. The world waited, wondered, remembered, and when Benny finally spoke, he gave voice to what the silence had always meant, that sometimes the most powerful stories are told not through words or spectacle, but through the spaces in between, the pauses, the quiet moments, the unspoken truths. ABBA didn't just vanish. They faded away with dignity. Their music endures, not because of the spectacle, but because of its honesty, an honesty born from pain, perseverance, and the courage to walk away when the story was no longer theirs to tell. For decades, the world wondered why ABBA, a band that seemed unstoppable, suddenly vanished from the spotlight without so much as a proper farewell. Fans clung to rumors and speculation, desperate to understand what tore apart the group behind those timeless hits. Yet the truth remained locked away, unspoken, until November 2024. That's when Benny Andersson, the quiet genius behind the music, finally broke his silence in a heartfelt interview with The Guardian. This was no polished PR statement. It was raw, honest, and deeply revealing. A moment of vulnerability few expected from a man who spent so much of his life crafting perfect harmonies behind the scenes. "We were exhausted," Benny admitted plainly. Not just physically, but emotionally, drained from years of maintaining a public image that masked their private struggles. Behind the sparkling costumes and catchy melodies, their personal lives were unraveling. Marriages fell apart, friendships frayed, and beneath it all was a profound sense of depletion. For Benny, the facade of joy they had to present was becoming unbearable. The studio, once a place of magic and creation, started to feel like a cage. The music that had once fueled their passion became routine, a job rather than a calling. The energy that had propelled them to global stardom was slipping away, replaced by a quiet desperation. He spoke of the emotional collapse that led to their decision to stop, not with drama or anger, but out of necessity. The band needed to preserve themselves, to heal wounds that had been hidden behind the songs for too long. This confession shattered decades of myth and mystery. It wasn't scandal or betrayal that ended ABBA, it was exhaustion, plain and simple. And in those few words, Benny gave the fans something they had long craved: closure. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't romanticize their breakup. Instead, he framed it as an inevitable unraveling, the natural conclusion of a beautiful but fragile chapter. It was an act of courage to admit that sometimes survival means knowing when to walk away. The interview was more than a revelation. It was a healing moment, a chance for fans to finally understand the bittersweet reality behind the music they loved. It gave voice to the ache they had sensed in songs like The Visitors and Slipping Through My Fingers, those hidden cracks beneath the polished surface. In telling the truth, Benny not only honored the band's legacy, he also humanized it. Because beneath the sequins and stage lights were 4 people who gave their all, who loved and lost, and who in the end chose life over perfection. That moment in 2024 wasn't just an interview. It was ABBA, finally speaking from the heart. After the quiet revelations of 2024, Benny Andersson returned to the spotlight again in April 2025 with a follow-up interview in Billboard. This time, he peeled back another layer of ABBA's final chapter. A chapter marked not by scandal or fiery conflict, but by an undeniable sense of weariness and disillusionment. He described those last 2 years, 1981 and 1982, not as creative highs, but as uninspired workdays. The vibrant energy that once sparked their songwriting sessions had faded, replaced by routine and obligation. The magic that made their music legendary was no longer a spontaneous spark, but a daily grind. Benny spoke candidly about how he and Bjorn continued writing songs, but the process was different. The melodies came slower. The studio sessions were shorter. The joy of creating was overshadowed by a growing sense that they were just going through the motions, like actors performing a role long after the curtain had fallen on the real story. The pressure to keep up appearances weighed heavily on them. Fans expected perfection, but behind the scenes, the band was struggling to hold together. Benny revealed that their decision to stop wasn't a dramatic breakup, but an emotional necessity. It wasn't about blame or failure. It was about survival. Recognizing that the music they loved had become too painful to keep making. What makes this interview so powerful is Benny's honesty. He didn't try to sugarcoat the end of ABBA or cloak it in nostalgia. He described the unraveling as inevitable, a natural conclusion to a journey that had taken them to incredible heights, but had also worn them down. The songs from their final album, The Visitors, now make more sense in this light. Tracks like One of Us and Like an Angel Passing Through My Room carry a weight of melancholy and introspection that reflects the band's state of mind. These weren't just pop songs. They were emotional documents, windows into 4 people grappling with loss, change, and the need to let go. Benny's words gave fans a new way to hear those last songs, not just as beautiful melodies, but as heartfelt farewells, a goodbye whispered through music rather than spoken aloud. The 2025 interview didn't just confirm what many suspected, it honored the truth behind ABBA's silence. It showed that the end of something beautiful is sometimes quiet and slow, shaped by the real human struggles that fame often masks. And in sharing this truth, Benny helped rewrite the story of ABBA, not as a band that fell apart, but as four people who, with grace and honesty, chose to stop when they needed to, preserving their legacy and their humanity. When the curtains fell on ABBA's dazzling era, the spotlight shifted, not just away from the band, but from the individual lives behind the music. For Annie Frid Lyngstad, known to millions as Freda, the years that followed were a journey marked by contrasts, from the shimmering heights of pop superstardom to the quiet, often painful moments of personal transformation. In 1992, Freda surprised many by marrying Prince Heinrich Russo Royce of Plauen, and stepping into a world that was vastly different from the hectic rhythms of the music industry. Suddenly, she was no longer just a singer adored by fans worldwide. She became a princess, part of European aristocracy. This transition wasn't just a change of title. It was a leap into a life governed by centuries-old traditions, formalities, and expectations. The Swedish press buzzed with fascination and curiosity. How could the same woman who once ruled disco floors with her powerful voice now navigate the strict, sometimes suffocating world of royal protocol? The glitz and glamour were replaced by the weight of ceremonial duties, banquets, and the often isolating atmosphere of castle life. For Freda, this new chapter was bittersweet. The spontaneity and emotional expression that had defined her music career felt out of place in the structured world of royalty. The stage had given her freedom, the chance to pour her heart out in song and connect deeply with audiences. The castle, with all its grandeur, felt like a gilded cage. And then came the heartbreak that no amount of fame or title could shield her from. In 1998, her daughter Annalisa tragically died in a car accident in New York City. Annalisa was just 30 years old, full of life and promise. The loss shattered Freda's world. It was a grief so profound that it silenced everything else. The music, the fame, the royal responsibilities, they all faded into the background as she confronted a pain that was raw and endless. For Freda, this period was not about public mourning or headlines. It was about solitude, reflection, and the search for healing. She withdrew from the limelight, choosing a quiet life near Lake Geneva, far from the flashes of cameras and the adoring crowds. In this solitude, she grappled with a loss so deep it reshaped her very existence. But even in the darkest moments, human connection finds a way. Benny Andersson, her former bandmate and longtime companion in music and life, reached out. Despite the complexities of their shared past, the joys and fractures of their years together in ABBA, Benny's presence became a source of comfort and understanding. Their reunion wasn't about rekindling old flames or reliving glory days. It was a quiet, heartfelt reconnection between two people who had witnessed the rise and fall of something extraordinary. They shared a history that only they could fully understand. The triumphs, the heartbreaks, the emotional scars that fame often conceals. In their conversations, there was no need for grand declarations. Just the simple act of being there for each other. A reminder that even after the applause fades, some bonds remain unbroken. Freda, who once needed the spotlight to feel seen and heard, found peace in simply being remembered by someone who had known her before the world did. Their enduring emotional bond is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows us that beyond the glamour and success, beneath the layers of public persona, lie real people with real emotions. People who find strength in shared memories and quiet companionship. Freda's post-ABBA life is a story of contrasts, of shimmering fame and profound grief. of royal splendor and private pain, of loss and healing. It reminds us that the journey of life doesn't end with the final note of a song. Instead, it continues in the quiet moments of reflection and connection that shape who we truly are. Her story invites us to see beyond the glittering surface, to honor the depth of emotion behind the music, and to recognize the power of human connection, the kind that lasts long after the lights go down. After decades spent behind the scenes, Benny Andersson, the unassuming genius of ABBA, finally stepped forward to share not just the story of the band's glory, but the deeply human journey behind it all. At 78, his reflections offer a window into a life shaped by music, pain, and resilience. A story far more complex than the glittering image the world once saw. Benny was never the one who craved the spotlight. While the rest of ABBA dazzled on stage with sparkling costumes and radiant smiles, Benny was busy building the soul of their sound, layer by layer, note by note. Yet beneath those perfect harmonies lay a man who wrestled silently with his emotions, using music as both a shield and a language when words failed him. He confessed that music was his escape. It was how he processed what he couldn't say aloud: the heartbreak, the anxiety, the moments of loneliness hidden behind the band's cheerful facade, all found expression in melodies and harmonies. He once said, "I gave my best lines to songs, not to the people who needed to hear them from me." That admission cuts deep. It reveals a man who was scared to face his own feelings directly, instead pouring them into art that millions would embrace, but few would fully understand. This vulnerability is what ultimately shaped ABBA's timeless appeal. Their songs were never just catchy pop tunes. They were intricate emotional tapestries woven with joy and sorrow, hope and despair. Benny's genius lay in this duality, a Swedish melancholia wrapped in irresistible melody. It's why even today, decades later, ABBA's music resonates so deeply, because it is real, messy, and complicated, the reflection of four people trying to hold themselves together amid the pressures of fame and fractured love. Benny's recent openness brings a new kind of closure, not just for fans, but for the band themselves. For years, the silence after ABBA's quiet disappearance felt like a wound left unhealed. Now, through his words, that silence has a name: exhaustion, emotional collapse, and the brave necessity of walking away to survive. He reminds us that the story wasn't about perfection, it was about survival. There's a raw beauty in this honesty. It frees the band from the impossible standards that fame often demands. They weren't flawless icons. They were human beings grappling with fragility. They made music that helped them live through pain, not escape it. Benny's reflections also challenge us to rethink how we view success and legacy. Often, we celebrate the final product, the songs, the albums, the concerts, but forget the human cost behind the scenes, the endless tours, the personal sacrifices, the relationships strained under public scrutiny. Benny's story shines a light on these hidden struggles, reminding us that behind every shining star is a complex story of resilience. And then there's ABBA's remarkable return, a chapter as surprising as their rise. In 2018, after decades apart, they reunited to record 2 new songs. It wasn't just a nostalgic comeback. It was the start of something revolutionary. ABBA Voyage reimagined what live performance could be. Instead of chasing past glories with endless tours, Benny and the team embraced cutting-edge technology, using motion capture and digital avatars to recreate their 1979 selves on a purpose-built stage in London. The show defied expectations. It wasn't just a concert. It was a digital resurrection. Fans from over 140 countries flocked to witness this blend of artistry and innovation. Benny, ever the perfectionist, ensured every detail, from sound design to emotional precision, was flawless. The avatars didn't just mimic the past. They transcended it, offering a new way to experience ABBA's magic without the strain of physical touring. And importantly, they declined a staggering $1 billion offer for a live tour. They didn't want to chase the old high. Instead, they redefined what it meant to perform on their own terms, quietly, thoughtfully, and with a deep respect for their legacy and well-being. This choice speaks volumes about Benny's growth, not just as a musician, but as a person who has learned to prioritize survival and authenticity over fame and spectacle. In reflecting on his journey, Benny doesn't hide behind perfection or myth. Instead, he offers us the truth, a story of a man who, despite fears and silences, created music that touched millions and finally found the courage to speak his own. His story invites us all to consider how we face our own pain and fragility. How often do we hide behind masks, pouring our deepest emotions into work or art because we fear vulnerability? How often do we mistake survival for success, forgetting that sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing when to step back? Benny Andersson's journey is a reminder that behind every legendary song is a real person with real struggles. That music can be both a refuge and a language for the unspeakable. That even amidst loss and silence, there is hope in honesty and connection. As we listen to ABBA's timeless songs now, perhaps we hear them differently, not just as pop anthems, but as intimate stories of survival, love, and the messy beauty of being human. And in that, Benny's truth becomes our own. A quiet courage to face what lies beneath the surface, and to find peace in imperfection. If this story touched your heart and gave you a new way to see ABBA's music, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep uncovering the real stories behind the songs that shaped generations. Let us know in the comments how ABBA's music has spoken to you through its highs and its hidden sorrows. Together, let's keep the music and the truth alive.